This is the book that really started off my self-improvement for me, and I'm just going to talk over it, what I enjoyed about the book, and whether I recommend reading it for you. So there's a bit of background to reading this book. Originally, I had a friend from school who's, I think during lockdown, he started getting up very early, in like sort of 5 a.m. in the morning. And he developed this very disciplined routine. And the sort of baseline of it was getting up at 5 a.m. every morning. And I always found this very, quite impressive for one. But yeah, I was always very intrigued by it. And he mentioned a book, and sometimes when I went around his house, I'd see it lying about, and it was called The 5 a.m. Club. And this is the book that I'm going to be talking about today. So, and he said this was kind of the book that made him start getting up at 5 a.m. And I think he had a sort of friendship with someone who said he was like quite a successful guy, and he sort of recommended it to him from there. And he read this book, and it really sort of changed his life. And from then he started getting up at 5 a.m. every morning. And so really interesting sort of example of what a book can do to someone. And I remember, because this was around lockdown that he started doing this. And I remember having a conversation with him a few years later about it. And he said that basically when he caught COVID, he had this, I don't know if you guys remember, but there was this thing called long COVID, where it was like you'd just be really ill after catching COVID. Like you'd be cured, like you wouldn't have the disease in your system anymore, but you'd still be suffering from a lot of the symptoms of it. And of course, all these sort of stupid people were like, oh, it's long COVID, it's a really serious disease. But anyway, what I found so interesting is, so this friend of mine who was getting up at 5 a.m, he had long COVID for a very long time. And he started implementing the process of the 5 a.m. club around the same time that he started getting up early. And he said that once he started getting up at 5 a.m, completely destroyed his long COVID. So, I don't know, that made me very skeptical about long COVID. But more generally, I think it just demonstrated to me the power of getting up at 5 a.m. And so, eventually I decided to read this book myself. And it was that time in my life where I didn't really think of self-improvement as a big thing, but I don't know why, but I wanted to read this book that he had been talking about. And so I think I found an online version, and my family had this, I went on a holiday with my family to France, and we drove all the way there. And when I wasn't driving, I would just sit in the back and I'd just flick through my phone, and I was reading this book. And the first chapter or so, I just thought, this is the most dog shit book I've ever read in my life. And it's funny, it's very American. That's the first thing I'll say about the book. It's very American, and it's very sort of, I don't know, some parts of it are a bit jarring to a skeptical Englishman, let's say. But there was something about it that I wanted to persevere with the book, so I got through the first few chapters. I think it was the second or third chapter where I was just hooked by it. And it became really exciting, and there were bits that I liked more than others, which we'll talk about, but definitely left a profound impression on me. And it's so interesting because I didn't implement any of the strategies of the book. I just simply wanted to read it for the sake of reading it. But it definitely left an impression on me. And I think it's funny because people say oh, there's no point reading self-improvement books if you don't take action on it. But I think I kind of object to that, because I think don't underestimate the power of that a good book has to sort of plant a seed in your mind. And even if it doesn't make a difference there and then, in the future, it will radically, who knows what that book what impact that book will have on you in later life. So I'm just going to talk over like what the book is, like why I think it's a good read, like whether you should read it. So we'll start with the book itself. So the content of the book is quite interesting because it's not very typical of a self-improvement book. I thought it was just going to be 300 pages of information about how to get up at 5 a.m. But what I realised quite quickly after reading it, after starting it was actually like a kind of novel, basically. So there's a sort of plot to the story. Like it's not like it's not just all information. Now so there's basically a plot to it, and the basic plot is there's this guy who's called Mr. Riley, who's this very successful entrepreneur, and he teaches a bunch of teaches two people. One's an artist and one's an entrepreneur, and that's just what they're called throughout the books. I don't think they ever have like specific names, but yes, there's an artist and entrepreneur, and this guy, Mr. Riley, teaches them the protocol of getting up at 5 a.m. and why it's such a transformative practice. And so this is where like the self-improvement side comes in, because most of the book is just comprised of Mr. Riley speaking to the entrepreneur and the artist. And there's lots of really interesting information that he says in the book that the reader takes for himself. So it's done through this kind of lens of sort of delivering the information, which is quite interesting. There are some quite silly side bits in the story. So like the entrepreneur and the artist, they kind of end up falling in love with each other and getting married, which, it's cute and everything, but like, I don't know, I slightly feel like it doesn't quite work, because I just like, if I want to read a self-improvement book, I just want to read a self-improvement book. I don't want to read as a love story at the same time, I feel like Robin Sharma, the author, doesn't quite blend it together, like that's a style of having a plot in a self-improvement book. I think it's an interesting idea, and I'm interested to read his other books because I think he does the same thing. But I don't think he quite pulls it off here. I think it's a little bit jarring. And there's lots of bits that are quite painful to read through, because they're just so, they're a bit sort of, I don't know, they make me cringe a bit. But anyway, despite that, I do think there's lots of good stuff in the book that I would definitely recommend reading it. And it's so funny for me to say that, because I feel like so much of it is just a bit crap and not very interesting to read. But yeah, I just still think it's really worthwhile. So the good things that I think about it, I think the first thing that I'll say is it's just a great sort of sales brochure for getting up early in the morning. I feel like the big thing with getting up early, well, with anything, but particularly with getting up early in the morning, is it's not so much how to do it. I think most things you know how to do, like if you really push. Like, not to say that there isn't, you still do need to know how to do it properly and effectively and whatever, have a process for it. But I think, like, going back another stage, you need like a good image, a kind of good story about how your life's going to be if you get up early. And I think it's all very well, like you can have all the best practices in the world, but fundamentally you need to sort of see this other side to life that getting up early gives you. And I think that's what the 5 a.m. Club does so well, is it really just sells like the first few hours of the day before 7 o'clock, where you're just completely alone, you can just do whatever the fuck you want. It's completely peaceful. It really sort of sells that side of your life, and it's interesting because I was a student like when I was reading the book, and I guess I was sort of sold to the complete opposite lifestyle of like getting up late, and like the real fun part of the day is in the evening and in the night when everyone's sleeping. you know, because that's where you go out partying and stuff. But I actually think, that was the first time I really saw like the early morning as a really critical, like really exciting time in its own right, and in a much more sort of profound and exciting way than like staying up late partying. Because obviously it's like good fun staying up late partying. I do think there's lots of like research and stuff that says you access quite creative parts of your brain when you're up late. You know, there's definitely a lot to it, but I think there's so much that you don't get if you're just getting up late. And I'm not just talking so much about the organisational stuff, like the kind of thing that, you know, if you get up early, you'll get everything done sooner or whatever. But there's just a sort of feeling about getting up early that just makes you feel that anything's possible. And yeah, I just remember when I first started getting up early and just standing outside of my student house in Manchester and just watching the sunrise while I was drinking some orange juice, just with my bare feet on the wet cold pavement, you know, and just seeing the sort of beauty of the sun rising, and I just, yeah, it's like, wow, like there's something so special about that, and I really think the 5 a.m. Club is indispensable for sort of selling that, for saying that kind of magical time in the morning. So it's not even that it's telling you anything practical or useful, although it does as well, and we'll get to that. But I think the real selling point and the real reason why I'd recommend people read it is because it just sells you this idea of getting up earlier. It gets you excited and motivated about it. And like, oh, I know motivation is finite and all the rest of it, but you need some kind of image to inspire you to get up early. And I think the 5 a.m. Club does that for you. Okay. Quite apart from that, it has lots of like good practical steps to getting up early that the guy who does this main character, Mr. Riley, talks about. And I'm going to talk about some of them here. I think that the most useful thing that he talks about with regards to getting up early is this quote that is, everything is easy at the beginning. Any change is easy at the beginning. What is it? It's quite specific. Change is difficult at the beginning, messy in the middle, and beautiful at the end. Or it's something like that. And this kind of summarises the 5 a.m. process, like getting up at 5 a.m. And Mr. Riley says it's incredibly difficult habit to build. You know, it's very messy in the middle. And I think it's a very important lesson to learn about getting up at 5 a.m. The idea that it's not just going to be click, you can do it one day. You know, it's very easy to associate getting up at 5 a.m. with like this beautiful routine that just everything goes your way. But the truth is, like, it's a very messy process. Like, once you're on that routine where you just naturally get up at 5 a.m. every day, like, well rested, like, it's very easy. But getting to that process is incredibly hard. And you're going to have to make sacrifices in the short term. And I think that's a really important thing to realise. You know, you are going to be, in the short term, you're going to be quite sleep deprived, which is quite funny to think because, you know, surely self-improvement, you're meant to be all about getting good sleep. But if you want to make that sacrifice of getting up at 5 a.m, like, to begin with, you are going to, like, it's going to be difficult, you know, and, like, I've had a lot of, that's one decision that I've made myself about getting up early in the morning is, yeah, like, there are going to be times when I'm, like, not as well, I haven't slept as much, you know, even if I've gone to bed on time, like, I'm not used to that sleep routine yet. My body wants to stay up later. So as a result, I'm going to get less sleep. You know, it's going to be messy. It's going to be very messy. But that's not a problem. You know, that's not a problem because you're doing that in the short term, but in the long term, you'll have that system in place where your body's just used to getting up early, and then you reap the rewards. So that's a really great thing to realise. It has lots of kind of cool, fun ideas, like setting your clock a bit earlier, your alarm clock a bit earlier, so that when you wake up, you see, so like, basically if you want to get up at 5 a.m, set your clock to 4:30, and then that's like half an hour earlier, so then when your alarm goes off, oh no, sorry, you do it the other way around, so you set it till it's 5:30, then when your alarm goes off, you're like, fuck, it's 5:30, I was meant to be up at 5 a.m, and then you'll get up, like it's a good way to get you up, and it's like lots of weird tricks like that sort of are a bit weird, but work very well. There are some sort of actionable steps that I think are less useful. There's something called the 20-20-20 formula that he talks about, where you basically spend, well, it's like what you do for the first hour of 5 a.m. of like the morning is really key. And like, it's one thing to get up at 5 a.m, but it's another of like what you do for that first hour of the day. That I absolutely agree with, but he has a formula that I'm not quite 100% in on. But we'll just go over it briefly. So the first 20 minutes, he says you need to do very intense exercise to basically secrete cortisol so that you aren't stressed throughout the day and that your brain's full of oxygen, you're relaxed. Fair enough, you know. Then there is something called reflecting. So this is where you do some kind of meditative practice. You could meditate, you could pray, you could journal, stuff like that for 20 minutes. And then for the final 20 minutes, you read, so you sort of grow. And these are great principles, but I feel like, in my experience, dedicating just 20 minutes to each of these things is slightly too short. I think you want to really get into, like, let's say, you know, you want to go to the gym first thing. You can't really go to the gym for 20 minutes. You know, you could journal for 20 minutes, but I feel like often that's when I just get started, and like the real gifts of journaling come in like after that 20-minute period. And same with reading, you know, I mean, you know, I feel like you should dedicate longer for these kind of practices. But there is something to be said for just doing a little bit of it to start your day, you know. But as I understand it, in Robin Sharma and some of his later books, he sort of takes back what he said about the 20-20-20 formula. He said it's a bit of a myth. It doesn't really work quite as well. It's not very practicable. But yeah, so that's kind of summary of the book and the sort of useful steps about how you can get up at 5 a.m. and stuff like that. What I'd say is just the biggest thing for me is just to go back to it. This sort of, it just really is a sales brochure for early morning rising, and just that being like the most beautiful part of the day where you can connect to like a really vibrant part of life that otherwise just isn't accessible to you. So yeah, definitely recommend reading it, guys, and see you in the next one.